With the allegations against Vince McMahon, now he's the head of the
WWE, used to be the WWF.
World Wrestling.
Right, World Wrestling Entertainment.
Entertainment. It better be, because it's not real.
Yeah.
Oh, Bill Maher, always with your finger on the pulse. And, well, wrestling, it better be entertainment, because it sure as hell ain't real, coming from the man who struggled to know what the current name of the company was. And Bob Costas, he made sure to remind us that it's no longer WWF. Get out of here. Tell us more, Mr. Science. It's not the WWF? When did that happen? Oh, that's right, 20 years ago. Thanks for the update. Bob Costas was recently on an episode of Real Time with Bill Maher, and in a post-show segment when the panel gets to answer questions, who better to answer one about Vincent Kennedy McMahon than Bob Costas? In the early 2000s, Bob interviewed Vince McMahon in what ended up being a very viral and famous interview due to Bob asking Vince the tough questions about the WWF at the time, the degeneration, the sexualization of the product, steroids, and other things that Vince McMahon took very personal, and well, things got a little heated, and that heatedness made for some excellent television. Now, some 20 years later, Bob and Vince McMahon are still tied together from that interview. But I have to say, with all of that time having been passed, and Bob knowing a lot about the WWE because of his interactions with Vince McMahon and other people throughout his years, you would think that he would be a little more educated and be able to educate the audience a little more themselves about the current state of the WWE. He was unable to do that, and if anything, he only just perpetuated stereotypes from 20 years ago.
Part of the reason they labeled it that way was so that the various state governments wouldn't subject those athletes or performers to drug testing, to performance-enhancing drug testing.
Because they're all on...
Yeah, they basically conceded that these are scripted matches. They don't like to blare that out to their fans, some of whom actually think it's real.
Yes, Bob, your answer can probably be partially correct, even though you know the main reason why this company's name changed to World Wrestling Entertainment in 2002, because you asked that to a question in Vince McMahon and got the direct answer 22 years ago. You're also probably pretty aware that 22 years ago, when the WWE became World Wrestling Entertainment officially, that some of these government regulations you say that World Wrestling Federation was trying to skate around, they already had done so. Because in the year 2002, most, if not all, already were well aware that this was a scripted entertainment product and not a legitimate sport product. They knew that in 2002 when the name was being changed. This was a very apparent thing. Remember, 2002 was around the time The Rock started to break out in Hollywood. So in 2024, to bring up something and to make the crowd believe that these perpetuated stereotypes in 2024 are legitimate today, these were old takes 22 years ago.
As the long ago wrestling trainer, Bobby the Brain Heenan, said to me, there's only two things that concern me about wrestling fans. They can vote and they can breed.
Bobby the Brain Heenan. He must have been one of those legitimate amateur wrestling coaches who was so spiteful and upset that entertainment like the WWF was making a mockery of his real sport, and he needed to take every chance to make fun of those idiot beer-drinking, tobacco-spitting West Virginia wrestling fans who believed anything they saw on TV. Or maybe, Bob, when you were interviewing Bobby the Brain Heenan, you were interviewing him as indeed Bobby the Brain Heenan, the wrestling character who made fun of all of the people who watched wrestling so he could draw heat because he was indeed a wrestling character. No better way to prove that wrestling fans are idiots than to quote a wrestler in character trying to be a bad guy.
My core audience is wrestling fans.
No, Bill, your core audience isn't wrestling fans. But the point you're trying to miss here is how big indeed wrestling is and how many wrestling fans are out there. So I can guarantee you, while you think it's this small little minority of people who are probably not listening to this segment, you have to realize the wrestling audience is bigger than the Bill Maher audience. So there is a chance that definitely some of your fans are indeed wrestling fans.
it's not covered in the same way as baseball, football, basketball would be covered. You don't have a press corps that's covering them and holding them to account.
But Netflix,
they operate on their own.
Well, Bob, the fact that yourself and Bill Maher don't follow the WWE closely, but you're yet aware of these Vince McMahon allegations, shows you that there is some sort of mass public media that is indeed covering these stories, as well as the fact that there was this clip from the Royal Rumble, the WWE's official press conference last week.
WWE, is it now?
Yeah.
If I was unsure if the New York Yankees were still called the New York Yankees, do you think you'd come to me as an authority to answer a question about the New York Yankees? The fact that Bill Maher was not 100% sure 22 years into the name WWE that the company was called WWE, I'm going to guess he probably doesn't have anything too educated to say about it.
a $5 billion deal.
Oh,
Yeah.
really?
It has a television audience. It's one of the few things that
$5
breaks
billion?
through.
I would guess so.
But knowing Netflix, maybe
But
not.
usually, like a deal like that, it usually gets stopped when a guy like this is attached to it.
And
Like
it
he's
could
the head
be.
of it.
It could be.
Okay.
Or someone else takes over and the
right.
basic product is appealing to enough of an audience that they roll on.
All right.
I love how the crowd had to laugh a little bit when they heard there's still an audience for the WWE, but Bill Maher quickly educated them in the fact that they have no idea what they're talking about and exactly how big that audience is when he brought up the $5 billion deal. It really shows that both the panel and the audience really are uneducated about the topic of professional wrestling as a whole, and while I would have thought Bob Costas might have been more educated about the topic, he clearly showed that he wasn't as well. They could have taken this opportunity to tell everybody just how uneducated they were in the fact that they brought up Vince McMahon in a way that made both the audience and themselves think that he was such an integral part of this company. He hasn't been a part of the ownership group 4 months, and he hasn't been an employee of the company for almost 2 weeks. So the fact that they paraded him out as if he is the czar of the WWE currently is incorrect. And it's unfortunate because these incorrect kind of stereotypes keep getting perpetuated, keep making it so that people who just don't like WWE really don't know anything about it. To me, this is as if you brought up the moon landing, and every single time you mention the moon landing, you always had to mention that there's a group of people out there who think that it's staged. So thank you, Bob Costas and Bill Maher, for keeping alive the age-old myth that wrestling fans think what they're watching is legitimate sport, even decades and decades after that has been debunked, and a full decade since the advent of the WWE Network, a network in where WWE over 10 years ago infiltrated the media with nothing but documentaries about behind the scenes of WWE product, behind the scenes of their regular lives and the product and how it's produced, and how in no way the WWE for the better part of this century has really presented itself to the fans as legitimate sport. But here in 2024, when we thought that was long since dead, thank you for keeping alive that stereotype that there's still wrestling fans out there who think that Roman Reigns and The Rock are about to square off in a legitimate fight.